Great, thanks for joining. We'll kick off just very shortly. Right, okay, 8:33, here we go. Morning, everybody. So I'm Lou. I work at Crimson, and I'm joined today with my colleagues Kat and Alex and Holly and Christine, sort of complementing, if you like, our team. So I won't obviously go into much detail about myself, but I head up our recruitment services business. So we run contract, permanent, and CIO search recruitment for a number of organisations UK-wide, and we're part of Nash Squared. Crimson itself was established in 2001. We have sales revenues of circa 24 million. And most of you will know that we have both a recruitment part of our business and also a solutions part, all very much based around core leading Microsoft products and everything Azure and cloud and all things fancy. And we work with a lot of organizations to include universities, housing associations, house builders, local government, etc., etc. Crimson's very much an IT generalist business, and like I said, UK wide, so not particularly industry or location based. Nash Squared, for those of you who don't know, have a group of brands actually all along the bottom there. We've got Spinks, some of you may be aware of if you've been in IT for a while. We've also got our Flex House business, Talent IT, Nash Tech, and as you can see from some of the information there, quite a large organisation with colleagues all over the world, and we're really proud with some of the work that we've been doing around D&I, and a lot of our employee resource groups recently just having launched Nash Ability as well, which is a new one to the mix. Thank you, Holly. Kat, sorry. So Women in Tech. So what's this about? So this is an open forum for everybody. It did originate as a group of women who came together to discuss meaningful topics and really have very open discussions about things that were impacting them, personal to them, both in a work environment and personal life, and all things that throws at it, and how we wanted to really encourage IT leaders within our Women Forum to effectively share and contribute. And that really evolved, as I said, in lots of one-to-one meetings many years ago now. And then our lovely pandemic hit. And what we did was we launched the webinar online, and our colleagues, the likes of Laura, who's with us today, and others have contributed to the content over the last few years. And I'm really grateful for all of you who continue to follow and work with us. What we like to think it's an open forum for no judgment, and very much to share ideas and really sort of get some real positive hints and tips to take away into your workplaces and with your teams, and hopefully to help your own personal development as well. Thank you for joining. It's an open forum, as I said, and we like to encourage everyone from a diverse background to participate in the sessions. We've had everything from subjects on the menopause to inclusivity in the workplace, to how to develop your own career and change, and international relocation, lots and lots of different subjects. And today's topic is very topical, and this is all around multi-generational teams and how to best motivate and lead multi-generational teams within the workplace. And I'm really delighted to say that we've got Kat and Alex. So Kat is our head of change in the business, very much an experienced operational director herself with her career, has worked with multiple large organizations in the past, and we were delighted she joined us to actually launch our academy a few years back, and since then has gone leaps and bounds in terms of effectively encouraging change management and cross-functional change within our own organization and supporting our customers. So Kat's going to be hosting the session today and very much giving you her insights. And then I'm pleased to say we've got Alex also joining us, a Dynamics junior consultant within the business, in our solutions business. And Alex joined us as an apprentice in 2021 in the pandemic. So all very new to this world of hybrid working. And Alex and I have had the pleasure of liaising a few times with regards to her own personal development. And without further ado, I think that leads me nicely on to starting off the things for today. So we're going to do a Q&A session mid-presentation. Please do drop in the chat if you'd like to, your LinkedIn profile, if you'd like to network and link up with anyone on the session today. Again, no obligation to, but we obviously welcome that. if you have any questions, drop them into the chat. We will have a natural pause as we've only got an hour today. We really wanted to just really get the content out to you and really share all this lovely content, and we'll have an opportunity for a natural Q&A session sort of midway through, and then obviously at the end again we'll open it up to questions. So there may be things that you're thinking. If so, drop them into the chat and I'll grab that chat midway, and then we'll fill it up at the end with lots and lots of lovely questions for Kat and Alex. So over to you, Kat.
Great, thanks, Lou. Thanks so much. Really excited to run this session today. I think it's a really, really interesting topic, as you said, Lou. So first of all, let's just start by aligning on what we mean by the term generation. So a generation is a group of people born around the same time, living through the same economic, political and social experiences. And because of that shared experience, this means there are some key characteristics which trend similarly across each generation. Now, a little bit of a trigger alert here. When we talk about key characteristics, let's be very mindful, like when we talk about any trends or any groups of things like personality types, that they are trends. And remember the bell curve. So not everybody falls in the middle. So when we're talking through those key characteristics, if we're talking about your particular generation, you think, well, hold on a minute, that doesn't sound like me. That's fine, because you'll always have outliers. But the reason that we wanted to cover this today is because awareness of these key characteristics helps us to understand the strengths, the fears and the challenges of each generation. And then that helps us as leaders to help manage people more effectively and with more understanding, empathy and compassion. That's what we're really looking for today. So what you can see now, there's a bar chart which shows the population in England and Wales. Sorry, any Scottish people joining the call, the census didn't give me that information. So this focuses on the working age groups from 16, which is the age that you can start an apprenticeship. Gosh, that seems so young, to 80 years old. So why 80? Why have I reduced the traditionalist? So on the on the left hand side, you'll see the traditionalist bar. I've reduced that down to ages between 78 and 80, because I don't know about you, if you go into B&Q or any of the sort of DIY retailers now, you'll see some of the retirees returning for various reasons, whether they've sort of run out of money, they've lived longer than they thought they would, they've got bored, or they want to leave a legacy. So you're seeing a lot of retirees now rejoining the workforce, and it's not just retail, it's across the board. So, now for the first time, as you can see, we've got up to 5 different generations in the workforce. And critically, you see that green dotted line across the top there. Critically, you can see that millennials and Gen X now have overtaken baby boomers as the dominant generation in the workforce. We're going to learn today why that matters and why that's so important. With babies born today expected to live to 100 years or more, this trend for multi-generational workforce is going to continue. And what we are going to do today is explore how we can move beyond bias, because it does exist still, unfortunately, to blend the best of each generation. Okay, so let's take a look at some of those key characteristics. Remember that trigger alert warning, right? So let's remember we're talking about the sort of the core of the generations. So let's start with baby boomers. So baby boomers refers to babies born in the years after World War II, where there was a significant spike in births in the UK and the US, thanks to soldiers returning home. Now, because of their large numbers, this was a generation which triggered significant changes. They entered all of the different life phases throughout their life. So every sort of phase that they've joined, they've really disrupted and changed the way that that things happened before. They were the first two-income household generation. They held strong work ethics, to the point often of being workaholics, and with a general preference for structure and discipline. Highly competitive, with a strong belief that you earn your promotion through years of toil and experience. And that's a really important point we'll come back to when we start talking about Gen Z. They're problem solvers. So they had to, use problem solving to apply new, unproven ways of doing things. They couldn't use tech in those days. Now, as they retire, things we need to consider if they're in our workforce is their fears of being displaced, replaced, dismissed, or thought of as irrelevant or obsolete. And I certainly see this with some of the people that I work with. They experience general difficulty with change, and there's an awful lot of change going on. We know in the tech world specifically that there's loads of change, but across the board there's a lot of change going on, and they fear particularly a loss of professional identity, and prospects. So a sense of purpose is really, really important for this generation. They also fear, and this is another key point, they fear that the flexibility younger generations want will decrease productivity. And I think, without naming names, we've all seen and heard some announcements by some key celebrities in the news that have talked about, get back to the office, you know, none of this flexible working, stop being so lazy. They prefer face-to-face conversation, face-to-face communication. I think that's really important. Gen X, well, otherwise known as the MTV generation, they really are the sandwich generation. They're squeezed between the baby boomers and the millennials, who are both got quite strong characteristics. I sit in the Gen X generation, and it is the sandwich generation in every sense. Lou, I know you completely empathise with this. Potentially having their own young families or teenagers, but also thinking about how they're going to care for their elderly parents. So unsurprisingly, work-life balance is really, really important. They make up a large majority of middle management, and as a result, they have an abundance of meetings. You look at any middle manager's calendar at the moment, and it's just call after call, back to back. Resourceful and independent, they face the challenge of attracting and retaining those younger generations and replacing those millennial workers, more importantly, who have left seeking more opportunity or a better fit elsewhere. They adopted early career portfolios and being loyal to their profession, but not necessarily to their employers. So that's baby boomers and Gen X in a nutshell. And now, if you Google generations, Generation X, Generation baby boomers, you will find a whole host of characteristics. So maybe I haven't picked up all of them here, but what I've tried to do is highlight some of those key characteristics. And I think the signature product kind of takes you back to, okay, well, you know, baby boomers, television was this big invention. For Gen X, it was the personal computer in the age of the internet. So that really triggered some of the changes that you saw during that generation. Can you imagine life without the internet now? So what about the younger generations? Well, millennials, or Gen Y, as they're also referred to, they're sophisticated technology-wise, also known as digital natives. They are quick adopters of new technology. They pick it up really, really easy. Now, the thing of note about millennials is that they are the most diverse generation, with more of this generation being accepting of different sexualities and gender identities. And we'll find out a bit more about why that's so important later. They're often entrepreneurs who are ambitious and impatient with career growth and company evolution. With unlimited access to information, they tend to be assertive with very strong views. They're purpose-driven and demand meaningful work. They want companies with social responsibility, and they want freedom and flexibility. Now, moving on to Gen Z, they're often seen as oversharers online, but because they rely on tech, they also haven't necessarily learned other ways to solve problems. They feel unprepared by education for the working world and have financial insecurities, in part because of crippling student debt, but that's also compounded by the cost of living crisis more recently. You'll often hear younger people saying, you know, there's absolutely no way they can afford to save for a house, for example, or move out of home. Often you'll find children living at home, you know, well into their 30s. Like millennials, they are concerned with environmental and moral aspects of the organisation, and they are specifically looking for inclusive workplaces. With this generation, we've seen an increase in self-reported mental health issues. They are anxious about work expectations and achieving success. And this is really important. You'll see this trend across how employee well-being and how employee engagement is really starting to take more of a focus within organisations. And that's absolutely fantastic. They face challenges of not being heard or taken seriously, and they struggle with understanding the perspectives and expectations of older colleagues. And we're gonna kind of do a bit of a deep dive into that in a little bit. So last year, Crimson carried out our own research around Gen Z to understand if their needs were different to previous generations and the generations that we were used to working with. Alex, why don't you go ahead now and give us an insight into the research that you did for us?
Perfect. Thank you, Kat. So that was a great rundown of all the generations currently in the workplace. And as Kat mentioned, I'm going to be focusing on the newest of those generations, that's Generation Z. I actually do just fall into this category myself. So I was born in 1997, so that puts me right on the cusp of that 1997 to sort of 2012 bracket. So as Kat mentioned, last year I conducted some research for Crimson about those trends around the emerging Generation Z, and if their needs were any different to the existing needs and trends that we've observed with the existing generations in the workplace. And that was really with a focus on employee attraction and retention. So during this research project, I consulted various articles and studies from the likes of Microsoft, so the Work Index and the Workforce Institute. I held interviews with members of Generation Z within the workforce at Crimson. So we do have a number of apprentices and people who aren't apprentices who are Generation Z at Crimson. And I also conducted a survey and we had around 30 responses from Gen Z participants. So on the slide there, you'll see the 4 main areas that highlighted from that research. I do just want to stress that these are not the only important areas, and there are things like diversity and inclusion, obviously really important, corporate social responsibility, sustainability, but for the purpose of this research, we did have some company-wide initiatives already running on those particular trends and sort of important areas. So we've focused on these for this particular research project. So I'll start off with professional development then. So when I actually asked in the survey what this generation's key drivers were when looking for a job, professional development actually came second only to salary. So this is something that is really key for this generation. It's highly desired, and this generation is looking to learn from the experience of other people in the workplace. They're learning on the job, and it's important to remember you've got a real variety of backgrounds from Generation Z entering the workplace. So you have people coming from university, but also from college, and in some cases directly from school. So they're not always very prepared, or they don't always feel very prepared for the workplace. So the questions we needed to ask ourselves were, how can we help reassure and build on those skills and actually give them that professional development and that path and trajectory upwards for their career? As I've mentioned then, so salary was the most important thing that was proved by my research for this particular generation. There perhaps is a stereotype, although there was a stereotype, that surface level perks, things like having a gym membership with your as part of your contract, were really attractive to younger generations. But actually the research proves pretty much the opposite. They're very concerned with job stability over things like surface level workplace perks, and they're really looking for a good salary and perks that contribute to stability. So things like healthcare and a good pension, and particularly compounded by things like the cost of living crisis. So this is really on the forefront of their minds. Throughout the research project, remote working came up time and time again as a really important topic. Interestingly, there was no one consensus on hybrid is better, complete remote is better, going into the office is better, but what there was an understanding that flexibility was really important. So I want to be able to choose what works well for me, whether that's fully remote. There were some people recognised that their well-being was much better, saving time commuting, working from home. Others made the point that their environment at home wasn't great to work from, so they like going into the office or having that social interaction. But what they understood is what works for me might not work for you, and that's okay. So there's the real focus and importance placed on flexibility. One question that does throw up in relation to professional development was the fact that in the past, you may have learned kind of passively from the experience around you if you were in the office. There was maybe more of a process of osmosis, let's say, drawing from the experience of those around you. So another question we need to ask ourselves, how do we ensure that that professional development is ready, available for the people that want it, even if they are working hybrid or totally remotely? And finally, management styles were something that again, popped up time and time again in various surveys, and studies and articles. So this was something that I also looked into. And this generation is really wanting constructive, honest, and skills-based feedback. So there isn't a fear of, I don't want to hear something bad from my boss telling me off that I've done something wrong. They want to know, they don't want to live with the anxiety of not knowing if they have done something wrong. So they want that constructive feedback of, actually, this could have been better and here's why. But conversely, they do also benefit from having validation and being told, actually, this was a job well done, and getting that workplace satisfaction and contributing to their well-being, and actually boosting motivation as well. Off the back of that point about well-being, they also are looking for maybe a slight personal connection with their manager. And when I say that, I mean an understanding that from their manager that they are a person. They're not 100% focused on their productivity, and they don't disregard the fact that they might have a life outside of work, and also just sort of emotionally, how are they doing as well, not just their productivity. And finally, there was certainly themes around leadership and mentoring for this generation, again, linking into that professional development. So having someone who is managing them, who is actually able to be a leader and to maybe direct them to places in the business or to other people to speak to, or maybe sort of career development wise, or who can just sort of lead them generally on their work tasks, but without micromanaging. So actually being able to place the trust in them to complete work without feeling like it needs to be monitored, and really, really closely monitored and micromanaged. So from this summary, we can see that actually there are some similarities, you might say, trends through the generation. So particularly things like the importance of salary, especially now with the cost of living crisis. However, we can see that there are also some trends that could indicate a shift, at least away from sort of traditionalist ideas of working. So, for instance, that importance of flexibility, that focus on well-being and mental health, and also diversity and sustainability as well. So when you're working in a multi-generational team, it is those differences in ideals and priorities that can have an impact on your collaboration, and your sort of workplace dynamic. So I'm going to pass back to Kat to pick up that thread.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks for the research you carried out. It's been really, really useful for us in terms of planning for our future generations. So as any MBA student will ask, so what? Why does it matter? Why are we interested in the different characteristics of generations? And I want to say that during the research for this webinar, this for me was a really, really important point around thinking about the heritage of our infrastructure within which we work. So think about those underpinning structures of corporate, education, finance, legal, those infrastructures that were built by traditionalists. Now, traditionalists are the generation that was before baby boomers. This is pre-feminism, built mostly by white men, mostly with a military background, loyal to their companies, comfortable with formal hierarchical structures. They valued sacrifice, they valued hard work to the point of being workaholics, and they had really strong respect for authority and the 9-to-5 working pattern. They also wore very professional attire, as you can see here. You know, bowler hats and suits were course for the day for most people. Now, with a military background, they're also the most patriotic group, with a majority believing, and we'll see this all over some particular tabloids, majority believing that political correctness has gone too far. So let's consider now millennials and Gen Z, who are, let's remember, the most diverse group with very different characteristics to traditionalists and baby boomers. Remember that millennials are now the most dominant generation. So what we can see is this seismic shift in the workforce that's coming along. Today's workplaces haven't been built or adapted to these accepted ideas or perspectives. Another consideration is only 19% of millennials believe people are trustworthy. And you compare that to 40% of baby boomers. So you can just see these changes and how they impact on the workforce. Millennials have less company loyalty, and the confidence to know they don't need to stay where their needs are not being met. Alex, you just talked about what's important to Gen Z, and quite frankly, if they don't get it at their current employer, quitting a job is no big deal to them, unlike previous generations. Now, we know that there is less tolerance between employees with the largest age gap, and this can result in behaviour that can be accusatory and maybe even sometimes hurtful. So this presents a risk of conflict within the workforce, and that's why it's important that we cover this topic as leaders, because unless steps are taken to encourage collaboration and understanding across the different generations, you know, we've potentially got issues. Now, negative beliefs people hold are the problem that leads to team discord. You might hear statements like, these kids, they've got no loyalty, you know, 6 months and they're gone, 1 month, one year and they're gone, 2 years and they're gone. There's no staying power with these kids. I know I've heard that, and potentially maybe I've even thought about it in the past. You might also hear, it's time for him to go. You know, he's too slow. He's not technically, you know, brilliant. He needs to be gone. He needs to go. But the challenge we've got is that people often fail to see that how their own misperceptions of other people's behaviours. I count myself in this. So an example is my nephew. He did his degree. He started working, and we were having a conversation about career. And he said to me, "Yeah, I don't want to work full time. I want to work part time. I want to work 3 days a week." And my immediate reaction was, "Well, wouldn't we all? But we have to earn that right." Now, doing the research for this webinar really made me reflect on that viewpoint. And I thought, well, actually, that's quite a baby boomer viewpoint. I'm not a baby boomer, but, you know, it's quite a traditionalist kind of viewpoint. And it really challenged me about my own thinking. Why is it so wrong to work part-time? And why do we have to earn the right to work part-time? Isn't it great that we've got a work-life balance and we're not all sort of slaves to this, you know, work travelator? We don't like to admit it. I found it quite challenging to admit, but we all do have biases. Some we're aware of, but some of that are unconscious based on our underlying beliefs and assumptions, our childhood experiences, all of those things. Now, ageism is harmful discrimination held about older people, but less recognised is adultism. And adultism, I don't think I'd heard this word before, is when young people are systemically and institutionally marginalised or otherwise made to feel less than others because of them being younger. Lou, I just want to pause here for a moment to invite anyone to share any experiences that are on the call or pick up any of the feedback that we've got so far.
Thank you, Kat, and great topic already. Lots and lots of ideas being prompted. I can see Laura smirking a little bit there when she resonated with some of what you said as well. And we've both had those conversations, haven't we, Kat, where we know ourselves that we've been in that mindset, and it is that pause that you have to take to really think and sort of consider. So you've just highlighted that. There were quite a few things dropped into the chat, so let me just summarize some of those, and then those of you that would like to raise your hand and share anything, please do while I'm doing this. So Laura, thank you. You kicked it off with early on in the session around the Gen X feeling sorry, you read that some people, possibly the Gen X you referred, feel that Gen Z display behaviours of feeling very entitled or being a very entitled generation. Alex, did you get that sort of feeling from your research at all? Did that come out in your research in terms of this attitude towards Gen Z, potentially to others being of a privileged, entitled generation? Was that anything that resonated with yourself?
I'm not sure I can speak to sort of the feeling of being entitled. I think it's obviously that has quite negative connotations. So, and I can't say that obviously that was a real main focus, but just in terms of sort of the focus on things like well-being and flexibility, I think obviously that could come across as maybe entitled to sort of previous generations where they've just not had that option, and they've had to tough out, they've had to make difficult decisions about their work-life balance because they just didn't have the option previously. It maybe sort of wasn't at the forefront, especially with things like the pandemic, that it sort of forced a lot of companies to actually adopt that flexibility.
Agreed.
So I suppose it could,
the expectation of that is where that kind of entitlement comes from. Yeah,
see it as sort of taking it for granted, perhaps, because this sort of generation has maybe taken that as an expected way of working, sort of with the way the world is now.
Thank you,
slightly
Alex.
fueled that, haven't we, by saying, you only get, you look out for yourself, make the most of your career, and that can come across as being actually quite pushy and quite entitled, can't it? So it's just being aware about that as well. But it is true, you only get, you've got to push yourself forward in your career, haven't you? So
yeah. Thank you. And Emma, you made the point around remote working. Obviously, you highlighted, Alex's comment around remote working, and you said that as a millennial, having had years in the office, it's something that you were particularly struggling with right now, being 100% remote. Was anyone else of the same position as Emma in terms of that motivational? Sort of how do you feel around sort of all motivational levels really being 100% remote working or in a hybrid role where, and I think several of you mentioned around booking meetings and how more difficult it is to have certain conversations without those being in person possibly and being more remote. Kat, do you have any thoughts around that, or is anyone? Sarah, do you want to add to that? Sorry, just to elaborate on what I've said. Sarah.
Yeah, sorry, I was just listening with interest because I'm Gen X and my husband is as well. We both work from home and I work in the office probably a couple of days a week. I find it really unproductive, if I'm honest, which I don't actually say is necessarily negative. It's unproductive because I'm interacting with people a lot, lots of face-to-face meetings, which tend to go off more on tangents. I think people are less disciplined in meetings nowadays because it's the excitement of seeing people, I think. And then thinking about my husband, he would say that he absolutely hates working from home. He really doesn't like it, but does have to do it now. And when he goes, he's interestingly he works in the financial services sector, and his boss, who's the CFO, has decided that everybody needs to go back into the office 3 days a week, even though they're all on home working contracts. And all he does is, although he likes to be in the office, he says he sits in the office and just talks to a screen because nobody else is there, because they're all quite diversely located. So he doesn't see the point. So even if he's had the opportunity, and then I've got two Gen Z girls who are the very opposite of feeling entitled. I think it's interesting how we frame that in our minds about what entitlement means. And I think somebody maybe from my generation views it slightly differently than how you explained it, Alex, which I thought was really great, where you were talking about actually that's just an evolution in thinking, which is actually quite reasonable around work-life balance and actually having a greater flexibility. So for me, that's more about evolution. So they have a sense of evolution and they've evolved a little more. I don't think that's entitlement, personally.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for that, and thank you for sharing your personal situation and thoughts as well. And I do resonate with a lot of what you said around being in the office. I'm, being a leader of a recruitment team of salespeople, effectively, lots of chatty people, and we absolutely like a swarm of bees, like draw to each other when we're in the office. And my days are probably less productive in the office also. However, for me, that enjoyment factor of being around people and being able to chat things through and have a cup of tea and just have a real human level eye-to-eye conversation does benefit myself personally, and I think some of my team. But equally, there's a real balance between then having that support and that feeling of energy in the office, and then allowing for that to really hopefully resonate through when people are at home, sometimes having a bad day, really need to feel part of that team environment. So I think that's kind of the blend, but I think that is something we're all facing. And I think Laura mentioned as well the difficulty of having certain conversations and certain meetings in an online capacity, especially when there isn't necessarily the trust or the relationship there as yet, and maybe new teams especially, that can sometimes lend itself. Has anyone got anything else they wanted to share or comment on, or should we ask Kat to crack on, and then it might just spur on some more conversations? Emma? Oh, hand up, hand down. I've probably answered your question for you. Emma and Marie. Emma, do you want to go first?
Sorry, yeah, it was more just I was was just going to add that I think I'm in a situation where I have to be 100% remote. We don't actually have a dedicated office because of the lovely pandemic. And funnily enough, I work mainly with a team of people based in another country, so I'm kind of used to that virtual
Amazing.
networking and building relationships virtually. So I guess it's pushed me to do a lot more of that. But I make an effort now, I think, to try and arrange UK meetups with the rest of my team who
Yeah.
are based all over the UK, which is always a challenge in itself because trying to get people to one place is another logistical nightmare. But one thing that one director did say to me last time we were there is if you spend a day together, so we got together last month, if you spend that day working, you're kind of missing the opportunity, aren't you, to forge relationships and build relationships that you're currently missing out on doing because you're working remotely. So I guess there's pros and cons to it, but I was just interested to hear some of the viewpoints, especially around the flexibility element. I think for me, it's great to have the flexibility, but I'm really missing that networking and just seeing people's faces and
And
having the
you
coffee chats.
you make a good point around when teams do collaborate and come together. I mean, we do it more frequently. We're in the office a couple of days a week. We've now called them team days to try and not make them obligatory. You know, there's still that flexibility, but we're encouraging people to, in my team, to be around to get towards one another. But to your point, actually, those teams that are more remote more often and only come together infrequently, the blend of actually a work day versus an actual social relationship team building day is a really important consideration from your director, as mentioned, because otherwise you're, like our colleague said earlier, you're coming into the office, or their partner is, and almost having an unproductive day in the office with no one around, and that's even more soul destroying, isn't it? So it's really about getting that balance, I think, and calling it out. I think, like Alex said, it's just being really honest about what the expectations are and why. You know, I've had to speak to some of my Gen Z team recently and say, look, I really want you in the office. So I really want you to benefit from your team colleagues around you, the learnings, the language they're using on the phone, with engaging with contractors and candidates and all of the above. Thank you, Emma. Marie, did you have an observation or something you wanted to share?
Yeah, there's a couple of things, if that's okay. So
Yeah,
I've
sure.
been listening with intent. I've always thought I was a really inclusive person, and I've tried really hard to be inclusive.
Yeah.
But there were incidents that smacked me in the face in COVID where I realised I needed to do more, so around misperceptions and things. I used to run quizzes for my team on a weekly basis, and I used to write the quizzes. And obviously, I'm in my mid-40s, and I had some people in my team who were in their 20s, early 20s. And it took a few weeks for me to realise that they weren't answering any questions, right?
That's brilliant.
Because
Yeah.
they didn't know what I was going on about. So from then, we took it in turns to write the quizzes, because they hadn't heard of half of the things that I was asking the rest of the team about. So from an inclusivity perspective, and I failed in that respect to start off with, and that really, I've reflected on that quite a lot, because up until the last few years, I used to be the youngest person managing large teams of older people.
Yeah.
And now I'm at the stage in my life where it's becoming the other way round. I'm now becoming the older person managing a team of quite there's a large age gap in the teams that I manage now.
Yeah.
And I was really interested in this particular session because I am facing this challenge on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And I'm doing my best with it, but it's become a bit of a shock to me, if I'm honest.
I think that's really honest though, Marie, and like anything around D&I, this isn't about trying to deliberately offend or misconstrue, like you say, colleagues or individuals. It's about learning, and it's about that journey that you go on together. So please don't feel hard about yourself, and it's great that you've called that out to yourself, because your example there was just made me smile, because we had similar sessions and some people absolutely loved them and others were like, this isn't for me, and it really, your example there was absolutely spot on. Let's move on. Al, did you have something you wanted to add before we move on through the presentation? I'm conscious of time. Thank you, Emma. Marie, sorry. No, are we good? Okay. Kat, do you want to jump on. Is there anything you wanted to add to
Sure.
anything anyone said there, or have you got a lot of it to
Yeah, I
explore
mean,
in
I
your next
think
bit?
Marie's given a great segue to the next section, really, which is I'm sure many of you have seen this image before. At Crimson, we use it when we're teaching the apprentices about, you know, the importance of different perspectives, and we'll cover off personality types later. And Marie, I think, you know, the challenge that you've faced in COVID is, you know, we got very used to back-to-back calls, right? That was our way of you know, almost validating that we were being productive. And the challenge we've got now as we've gone back to hybrid working is the value of just having those moments where you chat with people, because those coffee cooler moments, those water cooler moments, that's when you get those vital different perspectives. So this image is taken from Steve Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And if you haven't read this book as a leader, I would encourage you to. It's got some absolutely brilliant nuggets of information. So, you know, do you see the old woman, or do you see the young woman? And the point here is sometimes you can feel so strongly about your viewpoint and your perspective that you completely miss that there's another perspective going on. I think we've all been in that position before where we're absolutely adamant that we are right. But actually, it's about taking a step back and having conversations like those conversations we're having today to really understand someone else's perspective. And it's only when you do that that you can actually step back and say, you know, looking at this image, actually, we're both right. There is an old woman and there is a younger woman as well. And remember, the ability to present and discuss opposing ideas is absolutely essential for a healthy and open working environment. The challenge we've got is the rapid rise in technology and its 24-hour nature means that people don't have enough time to really connect and connect deeply. So the question is, how can we bring these different generational work groups together more effectively? So that's what I want to cover off now. I'm sure we'll pick up your comment at the end. I'll speak faster. So first of all, looking at millennials. Well, millennials, as Alex talked about with Gen Z as well, millennials and Gen Z, they want what we all want. They want meaningful and purposeful work experiences for which they are adequately compensated and also appreciated. Now, with high instances of mental health issues and student debt, they don't need to stay where their needs aren't being met or where the demands of their job feel unrealistic if they're negatively impacting their mental health. They're more confident about asking for what they want and leaving if the organisation doesn't meet their needs. So as leaders, what we need to do is ensure that our workplaces are inclusive for these newer generations by taking some of these steps. So the first thing is recognising signs of adultism, you know, that, oh, these kids, whatever, stamp it out, don't allow it. Provide frequent, ongoing and immediate feedback. That's what they want. They want to know where they're doing well. They equally want to know how they can improve, how they can progress. Empower them to take accountability, and vitally by giving them some responsibility. That's how they become accountable. Pair them with an experienced mentor to develop them, and make sure you give them plenty of opportunity to develop. So, you know, to stretch them. Educate yourself about diversity if you haven't already. Give them information and empower them by asking for and incorporating their ideas. Ensure you respect ideas over hierarchy. So, you know, sometimes we get so, you know, so tied in with bureaucracy and process that we don't allow people to innovate. And be flexible with your policies and your protocols. Millennials, remember, are more diverse and less trusting, which presents potential conflict for the dealings with baby boomers. So we're already seeing pushback from younger, less trusting, more diverse colleagues. And as baby boomers are retiring, be ready, young leaders will make sweeping changes across the board. So what about managing baby boomers? Well, again, recognising signs of ageism in the workplace and absolutely stamp it out. Don't let people say, oh, you know, they're ready to retire, they're old, they're not fast enough. Let's not accept that either. Understand their fears and challenges and identify areas where you could use their industry knowledge, experience and wisdom. Consistently share positive feedback and emphasise their value. You know, their knowledge is valued to the organisation. Communicate in the way they like to communicate. So in this instance, it's face-to-face, if possible. If not face-to-face, then phone. Gain respect by giving respect. Really, really important point there. And lastly, with baby boomers, document their knowledge. They are the company historians. So capturing that vital knowledge before they leave the organisation. So succession planning is absolutely vital. So most of us agree that qualities like empathy and compassion are valuable ingredients to healthy relationships, but it's interesting that we don't often show that when it matters most with our colleagues. And it's really challenging to put ourselves in another person's shoes. Marie, you know, we talked about that earlier, and we often forget how specific situations feel, even if we've experienced those situations before. So if you've never experienced a situation, it's even harder to try and put yourself in that person's shoes. So how do we bridge the gap? Demonstrating qualities such as empathy and compassion means that we try our best to see a situation through another person's eyes, but we have to go further than drawing on our own experiences. We have to, you know, show true empathy, and that means exploring the why. We have to think about things like, you know, why does this person behave the way they do? Why do they feel the way they do? What are they dealing with that I don't see? Why do I feel differently? Look at the key characteristics for your generation, and also look at the key characteristics for other generations, and have a think about, you know, why they're behaving the way they behave. Young people, of course, have an advantage of a lived experience with technology, but older people have had more time to develop people skills. So think about pairing people with complementary skills to develop each other, you know, the tech and the people skills, but be honest about struggles and use their differences to collaborate on the strengths of both generations. We found the benefits at Crimson of running workshops with our teams to help them understand different personality types. And again, you know, you're almost putting people in the box, but think about, you know, how are people energized? That really does impact on whether they like to be working in the office or not. You know, are they energized by the external world and being around other people, or is it absolutely their worst nightmare and they're much more productive and vitally happier working at home in their own environment, which they can control? How do they receive and process data? You know, do they focus on what their senses tell them, or are they big picture people? You know, is it all about their intuition and their gut feel? You know, this really does impact in the way that people behave. So it's a consideration as well as, you know, what generation they sit in. How do people make decisions? Do they make decisions through rational thought, through logic, or do they make those decisions with empathy and consideration for others? Again, there are preferences. You know, you have these personality preferences, so you're more likely to make decisions in certain ways. And then what situations do people prefer? Do they prefer, like me, I like things absolutely cut and dried. If you tell me to be somewhere at 9:30, I will probably get there a little bit earlier, and I'm in my absolute worst comfort zone if I'm late for anything. Or are they more like my husband, happy with ambiguity, he'll roll up whenever, happy with not having a structure or routine? You know, I don't care what we're going to have to eat tonight, we'll work it out when we get there, but we haven't got the ingredients and I don't know what time to start cooking. You know, you've got conflict there. So different personality types can play into this as well. So really taking time to understand, you know, differences in us, and trying to you know, blend the best of each person's strengths. So in terms of collaboration, leaders should challenge themselves by asking, how can I bring these groups together? How will we meet the needs of all workers? Millennials and Gen Z will lead the way, both as employees and as consumers reshaping the working environment. So leaders have got to embrace, for example, racial and generational diversity to add value to our organisations. Actively recruit people with diverse perspectives, and to do so you need a diverse hiring team. Hold employees accountable for fostering collaboration, but give them opportunities to do so. Acknowledge, understand and respect differences, and make sure each person's voice is heard. Stay current on market demographic trends and economic trends to understand employee and customer needs, and adapt so you're staying abreast of those things. Make it easier to take time off, and if you haven't already done so, implement flexible working. Provide change management for staff to help build a resilient workforce, and also promote with some work-life balance to enhance our ability to bounce back. And last but not least, employees must compensate fairly, or you'll find your Gen Z will start looking elsewhere. So that's it from me, really. I've put some examples of books that I found really useful in exploring this topic. And if you're interested to run a session as we have with our teams around different personality types, there's a free resource there on 16personalities.com. Lou, back to you.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate everybody's contribution. And for those of you that have got up this morning and attended today's seminar, or webinar, I should say, we will be glad to share this with you. We have recorded it, and Holly will try and make it a nice editable version. If any of you have any challenges with your workplaces, you would like any further discussions with either myself or Kat, would be glad to link and connect up. I myself obviously work in the world of recruitment, so if you've got any requirements around your resourcing strategy, not necessarily looking to recruit, but just really thinking about how you need to attract multi-generational teams going forward, I'm glad to help on that front as well. And it's something we're doing a lot of work with our solutions partner in our Paragon services as well at the moment. So there's some QR codes there, so feel free to connect. And unless everyone's got anything else to say, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kat, and thank you so much,
Pleasure.
Alex, for today, and Holly for helping to really put us all together and get this presentation in a great place. So I really appreciate everyone's time. Well done. Thank
Thanks,
you, everyone. Have a
everyone.
great day.
Brilliant.